All right, let's go ahead and get started. So this is going to be part one of our project management webinar. Today's topics that we're going to cover is essentially going to be the budget tab and the buyout tab. So we're going to look at some project budgeting and then commitment creation. We'll be doing a subcontract. So I'm already here inside one of my projects. Let's go ahead and, like I mentioned, get started in the budget. So RedTeam is going to take everything that you entered in to your estimate and create a budget from that. This is going to be broken down by cost code and category. So if we have multiple category types under a single cost code, I'll see that here listed twice. And I can point that out with my two concrete codes here. I have $36,000 in material and then $31,000 in subcontract. So same cost code, two different categories. We'll have those both listed as their own line items. Now, if you did not create an estimate, because as I mentioned, you made your estimate, you're going to have a budget. But if you did not create an estimate, that's no worries at all. You can create a budget without an estimate. What you would need to do in that case is click the plus sign, click add cost code, and then similar to what we saw with estimate building, you're going to scroll through, either search your divisions, but go through, pick the cost codes that you want to add, save them. It's then going to take you to a mass update budget screen where you would essentially put in the baselines for your budget. So you would go through, type in all the baselines. You would be able to build out your budget. Again, if you didn't have an estimate. We built an estimate, so I have a budget here already. And just going through some of the different columns on here. First one being the estimate column. This is just going to let you know what that number was back on the estimate itself. If you didn't build an estimate, again, you're not going to have anything here. That's no problem. This is not going to relate to any of the other lines in my budget. The line that does matter, though, very similar, and in our case, I think they're all the same, is our actual budget column. This is what we are budgeted right now to spend. You can make quick and easy adjustments to this if you need to. For example, the material for concrete, if I were to click on that, it's going to bring me to my adjust budget page where I'm going to be able to make a budget adjustment. Double check you're in the right cost code, the right scope and category, and then you can increase or decrease by X amount. So if I wanted to add $500 or $5,000, I could. I could also subtract $500 as well, whatever I wanted to do there. Second option is adjust budget to X amount. So I could click this and I can say, hey, I need this to be $40,000. Put that in. When you make a budget adjustment, you do need to give the date and a reason for why you're making this. This is important because we are going to give you a report, the budget adjustment report. I'll point out where that is. That is going to list all of your budget adjustments that have happened and why. And it's going to pull that from here. So important to note. Now, as for real world reasons why I see this being used, primarily, it's a good option if you just need to move money around. Maybe you have a contingency code. You want to take some money out of contingency, put it into concrete here. Or we have money moving from different categories, right? I'm going to take some money out of material, put it into subcontract. Maybe our subcontractor said they're going to provide the material. I can move it around. Anything more kind of in-depth than that, I would typically recommend using an official change order for. But again, if you just need kind of a quick adjustment made, this is an option here for you. Next few columns, we have actual, open, and at risk. Now, I kind of like to start with at risk and then talk back over to the left because that's the way that money is going to flow. So your at risk is essentially your estimate to completion. How much more money are we going to spend until we are finished with this code? Looking at the concrete, subcontract this time, we're at risk for $31,000. I'm budgeted for $31,000. Nothing else has really happened yet, so I'm at risk to spend that amount. The open and actuals. So when we create a subcontract, which we're going to do later today, that money is going to hit the open column. At that time, I would want to adjust my at risk. So at risk is not or auto adjusted, rather. It is a manual field because it is an estimated field, right? It's how much more money on top of what we've already spent or are going to spend are we going to spend on this cost code. So open is going to reflect your open commitments. Once you get invoiced against those commitments, that money will flow from open to actuals. That's going to be an automated process, right? When you create your commitment, it's going to go into open. When you put in an invoice against it, it's going to go into actuals. So actuals is money that you have truly spent. Open is money that you are committed to spending. And at risk is anything on top of that that you are going to spend. We're then going to take those three numbers and plug that into the complete column. Complete will be your total amount that you're spending. And if you use the at risk in the way I just described, that is going to be pretty much a look ahead number. At the end of the project, this is how much we're expecting to spend, $31,000 on concrete. We will then take that complete, run it against the budget to give you an over under. So for subcontract for concrete, we're right on budget. Nothing's actually happened yet. I do have a few cost code or a few line items in here that are over. But if you look, I believe I just haven't paid attention to my at risk just yet. We may need to go in and adjust those. For example, if we look at the subcontract for thermal and moisture protection. So I want to show if you click on the at risk, you're going to be able to adjust it. The adjust at risk screen will load in. Give it a second. There we go. And it's going to tell me what my budget amount was. We were budgeted $427,000 for it. We've only spent $5,000 just yet, and we have $422,000 remaining. I'm now saying I'm at risk for that $427,000, putting my complete at $800,000. We're over by that 427. That's not the case, right? I just haven't changed this yet. I'm not going to spend any more money on this. What I have open and what I've actually spent, that's all I'm going to need. So I can reflect that. I just want to zero out my at risk. That's going to put me right on budget to that 427,000. If we look at my complete now, I now have nothing in my over under. But let's say as I'm looking over things, I notice we may have missed something. I am pretty sure we're going to spend an extra $15,000, I could say. I could enter that in, and the system's going to reflect that in our complete, bringing it to the 442. I'm $15,000 over budget, or expected to be by the end of the job. Now, while I mentioned that RedTeam is never going to adjust the at-risk for you, we do have an option to do the math that I just want to point out. Up in the top corner next to the save button is going to be foot to budget. What that's going to do is make your over under equal 0 by adjusting the at risk. So if it's the beginning stages of a project, you're just getting your first few commitments entered in, you'll be able to essentially foot to budget, do the math for you. If you know you are still on budget at this time, it's a pretty solid option. Like I said, just makes it quick and easy. So if I click this, close that out, we'll go take a look at that thermal and moisture protection line. It did adjust my at-risk down. I believe I have a change order that's running over budget, so it's not looking quite right because we're looking at everything right now. But for that original scope, it did adjust it down to the proper amount. Looks like I do have $500 in a change that's probably gonna cause us to be over. But that is what that foot to budget button does. Now, another thing I want to point out here, the only column I haven't talked about yet is contingency. So contingency works the exact same way that at-risk does, just kind of a different field for you. This is contractor's contingency, not owner's contingency. and it is included in the complete as well. So that complete will technically be all 4 of these numbers. So for instance, you could say, hey, I'm not going to spend $1,000 on this, lower the at risk. But if I need to spend that $1,000, it is available to me. Instead of it being in my over under, I want it to show in my contingency. You just have an option of how you want to use that. Very similar, I can click on it and adjust that number. Now, I do want to talk about open and actuals a little bit more because everything else that we've clicked on, I've been able to adjust, right? I click on budget, I can change it. Click on at risk, I can change it. Open and actuals are pulled from specific things. You're not going to be able to adjust those here. But what you can do is click on these numbers. It's going to tell you everything that is causing that number. So in this case, I have 2 expense authorizations that is causing this $10,700. So I can see both of those here. And if I click on the actuals, I will see what the actual thing we're paying for. It looks like I have a few expenses that I use against that expense authorization. That's pulling into that $350. Now, I want to talk a little bit about reporting options here. If I click on our view icon, remember this is where you can find all the reports in RedTeam. I have my different reports. First one being the budget adjustment. We talked about that at the very beginning. This is where I can make or where I can view any of the adjustments that has happened. The actual cost report, this is going to be a full breakdown of the actuals column. So when I clicked on that actuals for that one line, I could see what was triggering that number, what was causing that number. This report is going to really break down everything in the actuals column. Similar to that, the open commitments report is going to break down everything in the open column. We also have our budget report, which is going to be the budget, kind of exactly how we see it, just in a printer-friendly version instead of in this RedTeam version. We also have our financial overview here. In a future webinar, we're going to be kind of diving into that as well. And then our time tracking log too. From the filter icon, I want to point out some different views that you have of the budget, different ways you can track it. So default will be by cost code. You see on the left side, manage budget by cost code. I can also group by phase, by scope, or by division. So I mentioned earlier, I have a few different customer scopes, a few different changes in here. It's all showing it by cost code right now, as where if I were to click group by scope, it's going to split all those up into the different changes, where I can now see up top everything in my original estimate, my original budget. As I scroll through, here's change order 1, here's change order 2, and here's a potential change, a couple potential changes that I'm currently working on. Don't have everything in just yet. So I'm able to view my budget in a few different ways. Like I mentioned, I like to point out this one because I think this is a nice one. I can lump it all into my cost codes. If I'm using phases, project phases, I can view the various phases this way. Same thing with divisions. But that is about everything with the budget for right now. We will kind of come back here and take a look at it. Next thing we're going to do, however, is create a commitment. So like I mentioned at the beginning, budget and buyout are the 2 tabs we're going to be working in. So we're going to hop over to the buyout tab. We're going to create a subcontract, and we're going to use the concrete cost code here. I'm going to go to the buyout tab. This is where you can manage all of your commitments. So you can see I have a subcontract, a couple different authorizations, but we're going to create a new one. So I'm going to click the plus sign. And what's going to open up is your various options for commitment types. So you might have a subcontract, a purchase order, expense authorization, labor authorization. That may be all you have. You can create different forms here. So maybe a short form, a long form, subcontract. Here in our training database, we have a handful of different ones. But let me go to our subcontract folder. I'm just going to use our subcontract agreement. First thing it's going to ask me for is who are we writing this with? I can select from the drop down here. You can also type in and search. Let's see, we have one of our vendors here, Extra Solar, that we're going to use. It will then load in any quotes that you have from them. Now, I don't have any quotes from this vendor on this project, which is completely fine. We can still create a subcontract without having any quotes. Really, all that's going to do for me is kind of autofill some things. It'll pull in some information from the quote itself, but we'll just say we don't have one in this case. We don't have one in this case. So I'll go next step, where I need to fill out the contract terms. So the date, we'll leave that as today. What scope this is going against. Now, if I'm writing this contract because of scope change 2 or change order 2, I could indicate that here, but this is going to go against the original. I can put in the subject. We're going to use concrete, and then I'll follow that with the cost code as well. Now, I do want to note here in step 2, you can only select one cost code. If you're using multiple cost codes on subcontracts, that is a different setting that you have in configuration. You'll still only be able to select one here in step 2. When we get to the next step where we're actually building out what it is we're paying for, I'll be able to select multiple cost codes per line item there. So if you're trying to do that, just note it's not done here, it's done in the next step. So moving down from there, the category is going to be a subcontract. The manager is myself. I could then put in a contact for payment if those are different people. Need to put in the billing terms. We'll say our default terms is net 30. If there's any tax that needs to be applied to this, I'm going to say there's no tax in our case. Value added tax as well, if that's something that you handle. Not. And then put in the retainage. We have a standard 10% retainage. That's what we're going to keep. And then select who they're going to bill to or ship to. You might have that option as well. And then yours specifically could have a few more custom fields. We're asking if there's a start, finish date, special instructions. There's some more information that I can fill out here. But we'll move forward, click on the next step, which will be products and services. As I just mentioned, this is where we're going to build out kind of line by line what it is that we're paying for. Now, if I had a quote, this is where I mentioned there'd be some information autofilled. It's going to pull in info from that quote, plug it in here, and then I can kind of review it, change it if I need to. I'm not using a quote, so it started off with just being empty. It's going to immediately open up to the add item just to show where this is. Let me actually close out of it. See, my cart is empty, but if I click on add items right here, that's where that screen opened up. Because it's empty, it just did that automatically. So I can start filling this out. Now let's see. First thing I need to do is put in a title. We'll keep this pretty simple. We will just call it concrete. And then I can add in my scope of work, work description, whatever you want to call this. But here's where I can add in all the details of what this is to entail. Let's go. I'm going to say sample scope of work. Let me copy this a few times just so we can all see what it will look like with a lot of text in here, because there's no kind of text limit that we have. Okay, now we'll see a little text block for us. Now, down from there, I have the option to calculate this either based off of a quantity amount or a total price, or a unit price, or a total price rather. So if this is a unit price, I can check this box. I can now type in a quantity, unit of measure, and unit price. We have a total price we're dealing with, so I'm going to leave that unchecked. And then I can plug in the cost code. So this is what cost code this line item is going to go against. I can have multiple line items here. Each line item can be a different cost code. So if this vendor is doing more than just concrete work, I can write one subcontract with all their various cost codes in it. And then I can type in the amount. Like I said, we're going to keep this pretty simple. We'll just leave it all on one line item. I believe it was $31,000 was from our budget. and then I'll click save. I could click save and new, which will leave that screen open for me so I can create new line items. Like we're leaving it as one. But something I do want to point out, I just kind of like as a nice feature. If you create multiple line items and you leave a $0 amount on there, in the subcontract, it's going to read that as included. So don't think it's going to say $0 on there. So you could potentially list one total price and then break down multiple items, add all of your inclusions. Those will just read as included if you leave a $0 amount. So our subtotal for this is going to come to 31,000. If there was taxes, it would add that in. But if this looks good to me, I can go ahead and click next step, where it is going to ask us to verify our credentials. So we have some handful of credentials that we have set up. Yours may be different, but essentially these are the things that we require our vendors to have in order to do business with. And if I take a look over here, I see all the not on file. Looks like this vendor doesn't actually have anything on file. So I kind of have two options from here. One of them probably anyone will have, which is the upload button. So we'll take a look at this first one, automobile liability. They have that. It's sitting in my email somewhere, right? Whatever the case is. I can click upload right from here. I don't have to leave this page, go to the vendor's profile. I can click upload. I can say, okay, this is the automobile liability. It expires, we'll say December 31st. It expires the end of the year. I can put in any other information about it, upload the actual form, and then click save. That is now current. That is now updated on their profile. The other option I have, this is primarily only going to be there for admins unless you guys have different permissions set up. But by default, only admins are going to have this one. And that's the ability to waive. I could essentially say, hey, I've worked with these vendors a lot. Maybe I just don't have, maybe I just haven't uploaded or updated their information just yet. I know they have everything. I'm going to waive this requirement this one time. I just need to get this out today. So I can click that waive button. I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of these. Like I said, it's just going to remove the requirement this one time. If I were to go to create another subcontract, even another subcontract with the same vendor, all these credentials will be back on it. All right, now we're good to go. I have their liability entered here. So we'll go next step, which will be submittals. Now, in our next webinar that we have on the Flex side, we're going to talk about submittals. So we're going to go through the whole submittals workflow. Just kind of want to point out that you can get those created at this step. So if you know there's certain submittals that we're going to require from our vendor for concrete here, I could click add and I could go ahead and get those created. Like I mentioned, we'll be talking more about that next time, but just pointing that out here. Next step is going to be any attachments. So if I have anything specific I want to give for this vendor, I can upload right here. I do have a handful of attachments, exhibits that have been pulled in from our configuration, essentially. And I want to point, if you upload anything or anything that's here by default, I can remove certain things. So maybe in this case, I don't need an exhibit 3. I can just delete that. There's also a checkbox next to it, and you'll have the same option if you upload something to display as a separate page. So by default or without checking that, it's going to list these as links. But if I click on it, and we'll do that for this PDF here, it's now going to display that item as its own page in the subcontract rather than a link. So we'll kind of see what both of those look like. So I'll click next step from there, and it'll bring us to our confirmation page, letting us know, hey, we have completed this subcontract. I'll go ahead and close the form. Back on our buyout, I can see the subcontract up at the top for concrete. Let me go ahead and take a look at this. Now, it is in draft status, indicated by the green text. So we are going to have a draft watermark once this loads in. So up at the top, we're going to have our logo, project information, vendor information, kind of a cover page, essentially. We'll then go into the scope of work. Maybe you call that schedule of values, which will list out all the line items. We do just have the one with the kind of block of text that I have there. So we'll see for concrete, we're paying $31,000. That's all this vendor's doing. As we scroll down, we're going to have all of our terms and conditions here. Scroll past this. We'll then have our signature lines. We're letting them know that we are requiring general liability, but I put that on file, so we're good. Again, we have our signature lines below. And then we have some of our, or one of our attachments. It'll lead into plans and specs from there. So I'll be able to view the plans and specs. The vendor will be able to view the plans and specs, along with a link to the online plan room. Below that's going to be additional attachments. So these are those attachments that we saw in that previous step. I could click on the links to go view those, but then after that is going to be the PDF that I said to show as its own page. So that is showing as its own page here in the system. So you do have that option to view either as links or as their own page. So if this looks good to me, I'm happy with it. I'm ready to send this out to the vendor. I do want to note you can email this in draft status. So if I want to send the vendor kind of a preliminary, hey, here's what our subcontract's going to look like, I could click email. It is going to give me a little warning. It's in draft, but it is going to be able, you are going to be able to send it rather with this draft watermark on there. If they print it, view it, that'll always be there. So everybody knows, hey, this is not finalized. But I'm happy with it. Vendor's happy with it. I'm ready to get this committed, get it signed. We can close this out. I'm going to go back to the buyout screen. I'm going to click the tools icon, and we're going to commit. Now, when I do that, if you have the permission to be here, it's going to immediately bring me to the adjust at risk page. Essentially, this is the system telling you, hey, your budget has changed. You just opened up $31,000. Your at risk is probably incorrect. And if we take a look at it for the subcontract, we haven't touched the material just yet. For the subcontract, we're budgeted $31,000. I just opened $31,000. I'm no longer at risk for $31,000, but leaving that in there is going to put my complete at 62. So I'm not going to spend any more money on this code, right? Maybe I am, and I could indicate that, but we're hopefully done here. I'm planning to get all of our subcontract done in this one $31,000 contract. I can click 0 here. That is going to adjust our complete to match that 31. We are currently right on budget. So I'm going to click save. Once I adjust that, it is going to bring me, or leave me rather, here in the buyout screen. I can now view this document without the draft watermark on here. So it's a committed form. I can email it to the vendor now. If you are connected with DocuSign, this is a document that you can send with DocuSign if you want to have it electronically signed. If not, you can click email and send it to the vendor. There is a final step to do here, and that is once you receive the signed copy. So again, with DocuSign, that signed copy is going to come back into RedTeam automatically. But without that, I email this to the vendor. They sign it, print it out, sign it, however they do it, scan it, get it back to me, totally fine. I can sign it however we want to. Once I have my signed copy, I want to come back to the line item, come to the tools icon, and change the status to execute. That's going to open up step 8 in the edit page. If we remember when we walked through this, we stopped at step 7, that confirmation page. We now have a step 8, which is a source document. Essentially, this is where you want to upload the signed copy of the form. So we give you a place to have that signed copy, but you can close that out once uploaded. And it's going to be executed, turning that blue committed text to black. So essentially, green text, we're still working on it. It's not finalized yet. I'm not done, whatever the case is. Blue text, it's committed. I'm committed to spending that money at this time. And black text, executed. All parties have signed. It's now pretty much a fully finalized document. But that is really everything with creating a subcontract here. Just to hop back into the budget, just to show kind of what we did, how this changed here. If we look at our subcontract line for the concrete cost code, we can now see that $31,000 in open. I have nothing in at risk. Again, if I click on that open amount, we'll see that that number is pulling from the subcontract we created. Maybe I forgot to check something. I can actually click view and it'll bring me to that commitment audit where I can kind of view everything that's happening to this subcontract here. So I can view the contract and changes to date. We don't have any changes, right? If I wanted to view the original subcontract, I can click view from there, which will bring me to that form. It'll show me any invoices. This is a brand new subcontract we just created, so nothing else has happened to it yet. But I'd be able to view everything from here. This is the commitment audit page. Again, I got to it from here, but also just to point out back in the buyout, you can get to it from the tools icon as well. Good form, I like to point out, really allows you to help keep track of everything happening to a commitment. That is about everything I had planned for today. This was the first part of project management. Thank you for joining me today. We'll talk to you next time.